What's the case for Oregon football and the school writ large, I suppose, but primarily with football to stay in the Pac-12? George Kliavkoff has to be making some sort of pitch right now, so what might that be? Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view if you're watching on YouTube of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show. Thank you to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you out there who have already done all that fantastic stuff. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has covered the season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And I'll start by just saying this episode is dropping on Tuesday, and because I will be on vacation in a place where I probably won't be able to record, download, and upload an episode, I'm doing this ahead of time. So if there has been a piece of breaking news that pertains to something I'm talking about here, by all means, please understand that, and thank you for understanding ahead of time, though. Based on what we know right now, I'm recording this on a Friday night. It appears that Oregon has been told by the Big Ten and Washington that the Big Ten is going to wait and see what Notre Dame does before they decide whether or not they want to move in on Oregon and Washington and try and bring them over to the Big Ten as well. But stuff changes really quickly, so it could happen. If you want to talk to me about it, hit me up. The DMs on Twitter at smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. Ask me a question. We can have a little back and forth. I'm not sure how many more episodes I'll be able to do this week. Just kind of depends on the schedule and whatnot. I'm going to do my best, but I don't want to make don't want to write checks my body can't cash there. My schedule can't cash, I should say. But anyway, we got that out of the way. So what's the case for Oregon to stay in the Pac-12 right now? First of all, I think it's important to remember, because it is a time of uncertainty and unpredictability, and we just don't know what's going to happen next because we didn't know that all of this was going to come down. I feel like it's important to remember, no matter what happens, Oregon football is going to be there. We're going to have it. It's not going away. It's going to be there. Might be in a different conference. Might play different teams. Might look a little bit different. But we will always have Oregon football. And I think as it pertains to other fan bases, Oregon fans don't need to be as worried as some right now. Because if the Pac-12 ceases to exist, Oregon will get picked up. I'm confident they would get picked up by a Power 5 school, a Power 5 conference. Not every school in the Pac-12 right now can say that. But Oregon, I feel pretty darn confident that they can. So just want to try and put everybody at ease today on this Tuesday when this episode is dropping. Of course, it's Friday when I'm talking, but that's irrelevant. So the case for staying in the Pac-12, if I'm George, let's pretend. Let's put on our role-playing hats here for a moment. I'm George Kliavkoff, and I'm coming to Oregon. And I have to make a pitch to them right now that staying in the Pac-12 is in their long-term best interests. The way that I do that is I say, look, it's a 4-team playoff right now, and expansion has been rumored, but expansion is not here. And so as of now, you have to assume that expansion won't be coming for potentially a long time, maybe ever. I personally hope that it's never coming, but I don't know if I'm going to get my wish on that. If you have a 4-team format, you can very easily make the argument that Oregon's path to get into the college football playoff would be easier in what would be either the Pac-10 if they don't add teams, or the Pac-12 if they added a couple Mountain West schools. Or maybe they went way outside the box and went and grabbed, like I talked about on today's episode of Locked On Pac-12, could they get Oklahoma State and Baylor? That hasn't been rumored. That's pure speculation on my part, but those are two teams that, if I were George Kliavkoff, I'd get on the phone and call. Even if you add those two, but let's assume you don't, you add a couple Mountain West schools, let's say it's Boise State and San Diego State. Again, so I'm going to talk about over on Locked On Pac-12 in greater detail here. If you have that, then Oregon's path to the playoff is a lot easier than what it would be in the Big Ten. Because right now, here's what we know about the College Football Playoff Committee. They will not let you in, no matter what conference you are in, if you have 2 losses. You can have one. Non-conference or conference, you can have one. They give you one. They do not demand perfection. And I don't believe it would be very interesting to talk to College Football Playoff Committee members about that, though. If you lost USC and UCLA, would that be such a blow? And let's say you added Boise and San Diego State. Would it become the American where you do have to be undefeated with a big time non conference win in order to legitimize your strength of schedule? I would lean towards probably not, but I only say that with about 60, maybe 57% confidence just because Utah's there. And if Washington can become good again and relevant, then maybe not. But the path is certainly going to be easier there while it's a 14 playoff. Because in the Big Ten, you got to go through Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State. I mean, Wisconsin is over there. Minnesota is capable of being good. Purdue is upset city with UCLA and USC now. That's an absolute gauntlet to have to go through. Getting through all of that with one loss versus, let's say you had to go undefeated. Is it easier to get through that with one loss or get through the Pac-12 with Boise and San Diego State undefeated? I'd say it's easier in the Pac-12 in that sense. So that might be part of the pitch he's making here is you were the first Pac-12 team and you were in the first college football playoff. If you want to get back there, this is the best path forward. I think there's a pretty legitimate case there. I think you have to avoid all conversations of money. I don't think that's where you want the conversation to go. But I think you sell them on the tradition and the pageantry of college football. And look, this is where you've always been. This is the conference where you've established yourself as a national brand that recruits recognize from the state of Oregon all the way to Washington D.C., where Oregon has got to commit in the class of 2023. They're looking at a player from Maryland. I mean, you did that all here in the Pac-12. You don't need the Big Ten to be. Again, I'm talking as George Kliavkoff here. You don't need the Big Ten in order to elevate yourself to national status. You're already there. You have that sort of respect. You have that sort of pedigree. Even though you lose a couple potential quality opponents on your schedule here, you're still a program that has the potential to be in a position to where if they win enough games and they get a decent non-conference win or two in there in a given season where people will look at you and go, yeah, that's a college football playoff caliber team. It's a college football playoff caliber program. I think that's what Kliavkoff would say in that scenario. The problem is on the surface, right? I'm saying, from Kliavkoff's perspective, you have to avoid financial discussions. It's going to be pretty tough to do. And if you were to bring in Boise and San Diego State, which in my mind would be the top 2 options from Mountain West to bring in, I think Boise's got a lot of national recognition as a Group of 5 school, and San Diego State is in Southern California, so you could be diving back into that market. And they're a really good program in the Mountain West. Go look at their win-loss records over the last decade or so. They've been winning a lot of games in that conference, so they could be poised for a jump to the Power 5 level anyway. But is the Pac-10 without them or the Pac-12 with them, is that enough to sell Oregon on you're still going to be able to sell yourself to recruits as, a school that's competing in a conference that is at or near the highest level? It's going to allow you to showcase your talent on the national stage as much as possible and compete against the best players and maybe get to the NFL. I think that's where the pitch would get pretty difficult from Oregon's perspective to be able to listen to and come to the conclusion of, okay, yeah, maybe this is the best spot. None of this matters, by the way, if another conference doesn't want Oregon and Washington, because they have to move together essentially as a package deal, unless the Big Ten had been to Notre Dame and said, yeah, we're just looking for one. It's like when you're looking for a single rider in the Disneyland line. Party of one? Anybody? Like, that's not very often. Mostly you're going to move in pods or in pairs the way that USC and UCLA have. But if Notre Dame gets added and they're one, then maybe the Big Ten would just look for one, and maybe that'd be Oregon. Maybe it'd be Washington. I don't really know. Again, there's just so much that can play out here. But going forward, If you ever want to gamble on something, BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball. Go Mariners. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. While you're listening to this, by the way, I might be at the Mariner game. You never know. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf, my personal favorite. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Let's hop into the mailbag. I don't think I've got really any other thoughts on whether or not there's a case for Oregon to stay there. I think the path to the playoff is the most compelling argument you've got from the Pac-12's point of view. Like, it's going to be easy. I mean, if they can do enough in conference realignment this year or next year to keep the Pac-12, at least, even if it's hanging on by a thread, but if it's still considered a Power 5 conference, then Oregon would have an easier path to the playoff in Pac-12 or Pac-10 than they would going to the Big Ten. But you wouldn't be getting as much money. You wouldn't be going up as against as many big time programs in your regular season schedule. So the amount of attention and nationally televised games you get might go down from what it was going to be. I mean, UCLA Oregon was a college game day game a season ago. That's huge. And USC and Oregon have played a bunch of big games over the year. Over the years. That's really, really big, and losing that is not something that can be easily replaced. But maybe they decide, or if they're not able to find a home elsewhere, then Kliavkoff and company have to get to work and say, all right, who are we going to add, and how are we going to market this as a new Pac-12? And I'm glad I don't have his job right now, because he's cleaning up Larry Scott's mess, and that's a really, really difficult place to be. Let's hop into some Monday mailbag, or Tuesday mailbag. Excuse me. This is going to be Monday's episode, then it's Tuesday, yada, yada, yada. So let's hop into some mailbag. We have 3 questions that I will answer here. And if you ever want a question answered here on the show, you tweet with the hashtag AskLODPod, at Smalls_55, or at Locked On Ducks are the Twitter accounts. You slide right up into the direct messages, wide open. I've been getting a lot of them, like more than ever recently. And I absolutely love it. It's great to talk to all of you out there, and people say nice things about the show. That always makes me feel good, because I just love coming on here, talking about the Ducks, sharing my thoughts, and being part of the community. It's really a lot of fun, and I'm glad to hear that you all are enjoying the show. You can also hop in the YouTube comments as well. I monitor those every day, even when I'm potentially not doing any more episodes this week. I might. I'm not saying no, just saying don't count on it per se. This might be a little bit of a vacation time for me, but just know I'll still monitor those. We can have some chats back and forth, and then maybe get some ideas for future show topics as well. And by the way, right before I hop into the mailbag, last week, if you did not see, Oregon did make the top 7 for the number 1 defensive lineman in the class of 2023. I know recruiting is still happening. Crazy how how that works, but that stuff is still going on, and we will continue to monitor it here on the show, which is why you should like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching if you haven't already. But Oregon made the top 7. That was pretty expected, but no surprises in a negative way there. So overall, good news. At Skodux1912 asks, hey Spencer, I have a question for a future Locked On episode. That would be this Locked On episode. With Dickey's stock on the rise, Jurrion Dickey, and likely upgrading to a 5-star recruit, I've heard that as well, does him recommitting amid all this deserved hype give increased optimism to Dante Moore committing to the Ducks? Maybe by the time this episode drops, Dante Moore has committed to the Ducks, but that doesn't seem particularly likely. However, I have had to eat crow on this show before. I don't know where that expression comes from. I just know what it means. I have had to do that before, most notably with regards to Will Richardson, whether or not he was going to return to the University of Oregon, which he is for the men's basketball team. But to answer this question, and for those of you who don't understand the context here, Jurrion Dickey was, I believe, in Miami. I don't know if it was for 7-on-7 or if he was visiting the Hurricanes, but he was there, and he tweeted out that he was 100% committed to the Ducks, hashtag Go Ducks and all that sort of stuff. And that's a nice thing to see. I would rather see that than have him put out a post like Johnny Bowens did for Texas A&M, 4-star defensive lineman in the class of 2023 that Oregon is very much on the hunt for. They had him during that big recruiting weekend that seems like yesterday's news at this point. But they had him on campus for that big recruiting weekend. Then he decommitted after having previously verbally committed to Texas A&M. So I'd rather see Dickey say that than say, I'm opening back up my recruitment. I'm still very interested in the Ducks. Yeah, he hasn't said that, just to be clear. However, just keep in mind, there was a point in time back in the day where Mel Tucker said he was 100% committed to Colorado football and he was going to be their head coach and he wasn't leaving anywhere. And he said that in a tweet. Famous last words. I'm not saying I have any inclination as to whether or not that could happen. I do know that other schools are, looking at him more and more because his stock has been rising. As Skodux 1912 said, he might be upgraded to a 5-star at some point. Doesn't change the player necessarily, but it does change the caliber of recruit that Oregon would get and the recruiting rankings. It might shoot them up the list a little bit in that sense. But I think a great recruiting tool for Jurrion Dickey would be to get Dante Moore. I mean, you give him a direct idea of who he's going to be catching passes from, and we saw what happened with Arch Manning at Texas, right? Jonte Cook, who Oregon was after a little bit, 5-star wideout in the class of 2023. They were after him. They were in his final 3, but he ended up going to Texas right after Arch Manning committed. So if Dante Moore commits to the Ducks, I think that will solidify Dickey as continuing to be an Oregon Duck. But if Oregon, kind of fumbles the ball here since they've been trending towards him now for a couple weeks, if they end up not getting Dante Moore, I would feel, disappointed severely that we didn't get him because I think he has a lot of great attributes and he's a top 10 player in the class of 2023 and he'd be Oregon's highest rated quarterback commit in school history. But I think you would also be looking at a situation where Jurrion Dickey might look around and go, oh, okay. I still like Oregon. I love you guys up there in Eugene and everything. And, I watched you from when I was young, which is what he told me. But who am I going to be catching passes from here? I mean, is it going to be Bo Nix? Will it be Jay Butterfield or Ty Thompson? Is one of them going to transfer? Like, that just adds a lot of uncertainty. So I think right now, if Dante Moore will commit, I would not worry as much about Jurrion Dickey. I feel fine about him tweeting out like, nope, I'm still committed to Ducks, all this sort of stuff. Like that's fine, but there's a long way to go before you sign your NLI, your National Letter of Intent. So that's still a player I feel Oregon definitely needs to recruit. Peyton asks, Peyton Chiassen, I'm just going to butcher that for 5 minutes. So let's get into the question. You said in the video today that the main reason USC and UCLA are leaving is for the money, and they can make or the money they can make on TV deals the Big Ten has, which makes total sense. But with those two schools making more money and being able to improve on the football program, does that affect Oregon in any way? Interesting question. I'm not sure if the winning pedigree of USC and UCLA is elevated at all going to the Big Ten. I mean, USC and the Pac-12, what were we talking about all off season? Are they going to be able to get to college football playoff in the next 2 or 3 years under Lincoln Riley? Heck, we still might see them do that with Lincoln Riley. Like you never know. We'll have to see how they play this fall, but they do still have 2 seasons left in the Conference of Champions. But I don't see how their winning pedigree as programs elevates dramatically. I think it's going to be a lot tougher for UCLA. It'll be a lot tougher for both of them than it would have been in the Pac-12 to, just physically add up wins over the course of the season because you have so many good teams in the Big Ten. It's absolutely loaded. You've got Michigan, you've got Ohio State, you've got Wisconsin, you got Michigan State. I mean, the Penn State. Like the list goes on of college football playoff caliber programs or schools that have gotten right there, schools that have gotten into the playoff before. Ohio State has played for several national championships and won one, of course, as we know, within the last decade. But so the other part of the question is, does that affect Oregon in any way? The answer is yes. The way the conferences divvy up money is evenly. So what they do is you have these big time games, and there's a lot of money that goes into it. The TV contracts and ad revenue that comes from it, based on however many people are watching, which is a huge component. That all is tied together. And then at the end of the year, the conference, from the TV deal that they have, depending on how many people have watched. I don't know why that went away. I think I nicked the space bar. Anyway, so depending on how many people have watched and what the ratings have been, they have a pool of money that they then distribute back to their schools. So let's say, for instance, it reverts back to being the Pac-10. You don't have UCLA and USC. What you have just lost are the many millions of viewers at home that watch those schools and the people who watch nationally as well USC and UCLA football games. The money that gets generated from that indirectly from ad revenue plays into how much money they get as a conference each year. That's why you want to have successful teams, successful programs. It's why, when you have a flagship program as a conference, you're promoting them very hard because you want people to pay attention, because that gets more eyeballs, because that brings in more money, because that gets a better TV contract deal, and then you can give more money back to your schools. So if it went back to being the Pac-10 and the Pac-12, you'd lose that LA market. So you just lost a lot of eyeballs on your conference, right? Before you watch a college football game, you see that you're watching the Pac-12 on ESPN. You're watching the Big 12 on ESPN. They put that in there to remind you, essentially, to brand themselves, number one, but number two, to also kind of remind you, like, this is the conference that you're watching, and this is the conference that you are supporting by choosing to spend your time watching this college football game. So the amount of money, and the Pac-12 right now is fourth out of the Power 5 conferences in terms of how much they distribute to each of their school in 2022. According to a report I read from SI, it was $34 million, which is just a little bit more than the fifth, the lowest Power 5 conference, the ACC, at $31 million. Big 12 was around 41. SEC 54, Big 10 57, right? That's how much money is given back at the end of the year to each school for 2022 from the media rights deals. So if you have fewer eyeballs watching Pac-12 football games, that's fewer money, that's fewer dollars going to the conference at the end of the year, and then Oregon as a result is not going to get as much money there. Now, is that going to significantly hinder the program because it needs a bunch of money? Not necessarily, but it never hurts to have more in college sports. That pays for coaches' salaries, recruiting trips, facilities. There's a litany of expenses that you have there in college athletics, but that's how it's tied together. And the reason primarily USC and UCLA are going to the Big Ten is because they're going to be able to get more money. And one reason as well, and why the Pac-12 media rights deals are such utter garbage, and everybody's been saying that for years. Now we're seeing it come to fruition because they're not giving their schools enough money to keep USC and UCLA around, is that the time of day when you play a game matters a lot. If Oregon plays a primetime game, a lot more eyeballs all over the country are watching that than are going to watch Pac-12 after dark. I have a good friend of mine who lives in Brooklyn, and he went to Stanford. And yes, he is ridiculously smart. Arguing with him is very difficult. It is insanely difficult because he is sharp as a whip. But anyway, he does not stay up over there, right? He grew up on the West Coast, loves Stanford, loves the Pac-12. He does not stay up watching the games over there. So casual fans are not going to watch as often. If you have a 7, 8 o'clock West Coast kickoff, that's 10, 11 o'clock on the East Coast. Sure, there are some people staying up late watching in bars, but they're not that many. There are not as many. And so going to the Big Ten now, I think you're going to be able to have better kickoff times for USC and UCLA. And they've got, I think, a better deal with Fox where, they've got the big noon kickoff. And that's, often been a Big Ten game, a heck of a lot more than it's been a Pac-12. I don't think it ever has been a Pac-12 game. It might have been. I might be wrong on that. But I'm just saying all of that ties into why this decision ultimately was made. Is USC and UCLA saw dollar signs, looked at what the payouts are in the Big Ten, and said, you know what, we're either going to be at a championship level or we're not, but I'd rather do it with more money in a tougher conference than less money in a weaker conference. Not what I would have done, not what I would like them to do. I would have rather seen the Pac-12 stay intact, but that's not what's going to happen going forward. So I hope that all makes sense. If you don't have big time flagship programs in your conference, you're not going to have as many people paying attention and watching, and that's going to result in less distribution for all your member schools at the end of the year. Wrap it up today with a recruiting question. This is from @IsaiahG_0 on Twitter. Since we lost out on Jonte Cook, the guy who went to Texas, 5-star wideout, do you see Lanning and company pushing harder for Malik Benson in the coming days? I don't expect them to go overboard, Because the wide receiver position, if you look at Oregon's position groups across the board, offense and defense, I'd say wide receiver is the one that is the most set for the next couple years at least, with just a bunch of young talent there. I mean, you have a variety of names. I'm not saying they're not going to go after Malik Benson, who's the top JUCO prospect. Pretty sure he's top JUCO prospect. Certainly the top JUCO wideout in the class of 2023. And I've talked about him a little bit here on the show. Big run after the catch guy. He's somebody you want to get the ball in space to. But I think the wide receiver position for Oregon is pretty set for the next couple of years, right? I mean, Chase Coda's gone after this season, but you've got Troy Franklin, you've got Dante Thornton, you've got Chris Hudson, Seven McGee, and then Kyler Casper's in the class of 2022. You've got Isaiah Bravard on there as well. He was a four-star recruit and is a redshirt freshman. Coming in next year, you've got Ashton Cozart and Jurrion Dickey. Like, I don't think it's as much of a position of need. Like, would I take Benson? Would the staff take Malik Benson? Yeah, of course. You always want to add talented players. You always want to have as many good guys at any position group as you can on the roster. But when you think about how Dan Lanning is going to want to win football games, which is defense first, and the status of each position group, like look at the defensive line and the secondary compared to the wide receiver group. I don't think it's a scenario where they're going to double their efforts and say like, oh, we got to get this guy. It's a big position of need. They'll still recruit him. I expect them to do that. But I think their efforts right now, rightfully, are on guys like David Hicks. Jaden Wayne looks like he's going to go to Miami. He's going to spend his senior year in IMG Academy of Florida, along with Riley Williams, who committed to Miami earlier today as I'm recording this. So might be out of the Jaden Wayne sweepstakes, sadly, but Mateo Uiagalelei is in play. David Hicks is in play. Johnny Bowman is in play, verbally decommitted from Texas A&M. I think there are bigger priorities where I would say, like, if you lose one opportunity for a recruit over here and you're going to double your efforts somewhere else, I don't think it needs to go at the wide receiver position because, like I was talking about earlier, if you get Dante Moore, then Casper is certainly not going to go anywhere. Not that I was expecting him to, but I don't think Jurrion Dickey would go anywhere if you got Dante Moore. And I think you'd pretty easily attract other receiver recruits or maybe a transfer or two if that became a need for next season as well. So I don't expect them to do that, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't still get Malik Benson because he's a playmaker there. But I really like Oregon's wide receivers. I do. Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin are two of the highest rated wide receivers ever to commit to the University of Oregon. Cameron Colvin was a 5-star. D'Anthony was, I think, listed as a running back officially, so not a wide receiver. But I think the wide receiver room for the next couple of years, I think it's pretty darn set. I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.